I'd like to place this sense of Masao as a destructive character in a more local intellectual and institutional context with another comparison, and that brings me back to the founder of the UCSD Literature Department, Roy Harvey Pierce. As I recall, Roy Pierce was not a fan of Masao's, perhaps because Masao was too much like himself, a provocateur in transgressing conventional boundaries. But a provocateur who, unlike Roy, had a fundamental distrust of institutions and institutional power. Roy was known for transgressing boundaries intellectually in his own work as one of the most influential Americanists of his generation, and for recruiting scholars to the literature department whose literary criticism was not restricted to the literary. Marxists like Carlos Blanco and Fred Jameson, and scholars who worked to undermine the foundations of traditional disciplines. Paige Dubois in the field of classics, Michel de Certeau in the field of history and historiography. And he played a supporting role in making the department open to the work of scholar teachers who challenged the conventions of American studies and American literature. Shirley Ann Williams in African American literature, Rosaura Sanchez, Marta Sanchez, Jorge Mariscal in Chicano literature, and Lisa Lowe in Asian American literature. But Roy was unable to extend his tolerance of criticism to the institution of the university itself, nor to the academic profession, and certainly not to the department that was largely of his making. Masao's skepticism was too far-reaching, and at times it reached into the history of the department itself. One way of understanding the differences between them with respect to relations among disciplines is by thinking of two different, even opposed prefixes. Roy understood the relationship among disciplines by the prefix inter, as an interdisciplinary. Masao understood that relationship by the prefix trans, and transdisciplinary is an important operative term in Trespasses. From my own vantage point, Masao's arrival in the literature department and on this campus was liberating because of his important role as a catalyst to fruitful controversy across disciplines, and his inspiring example of how to remain engaged critically within institutional constraints that are far more constraining than many of us would like to imagine. My colleague Jorge Mariscal told me recently that once when he complained to Masao that the arguments of some colleagues who fancied themselves to be speaking truth to power were really no more than liberal platitudes, Masao responded, "Liberal is about all that is possible in this institutional setting." In this respect, Masao's skepticism enabled a more realistic appraisal of the structures of authority and power in the university system than what many self-styled radicals are able to grasp. Despite his distrust of traditional humanism and his frequent references in his late work to the decline and increasing uselessness of the humanities, Masao remained a humanist in search of some universal human value that is not a mere alibi for domination by one culture of another. He tried to avoid transcendental notions and the reduction of caring to mere sentimentality, but unlike Jameson and like others among his friends, Said, Chomsky, and Najita, for example, his politics was fundamentally an ethical politics. Jameson has often drawn a distinction between ethical arguments and arguments based on Marxist structural and historical materialism, with the implication that ethics remains a fundamentally liberal bourgeois category. I've often agreed with Jameson in this regard, but I've also wondered how analysis and interpretation from the standpoint of political economy gets translated into political engagement and action. Moreover, it seems to me that for art to have a transformative role in history, there must be an ethical moment in the utopian theory and practice that Jameson identifies as the basis of the aesthetic. During the fever of what Masao called speculation on speculation that led to the investment banking collapse of 2008, I was initially surprised by the frequency with which Masao used the term greed to describe what was happening in the world. It seemed such an outmoded, moralistic term. But as the history of the financial crisis unfolded, And as one imagined the consequences for a majority of the world's population, Massao's term became increasingly apt. Similarly, when he turned his attention to ecology and environmental studies, which he describes in Trespasses as, quote, uniquely transdisciplinary and global, close quote, he called for collaborative research towards a goal defined by an ethical imperative, environmental justice. In the long essay, Literary Elaborations, he wrote of the likelihood that humans would be the agents of their own extinction, but also of the likelihood of long-term survival of the Earth's ecosystem and of its capacity to support other forms of life, microbes, ants, rats, cockroaches. It seemed at times toward the end of his own life that he took special satisfaction from imagining a world of cockroaches. And yet, in his perverse and destructive imagination, this was a profoundly humanist image. The essay concludes, quote, at this time of very little hope all around, we can at least look forward to ongoing life on Earth. And as long as we entertain any hope, we will manage to find the courage to keep trying, close quote. I like to think that in that ultimate word, trying, Massao had a double sense in mind, comparable to the double sense of Montaigne's originary term, essai, meaning both try and trial, an effort of human will and a simultaneous questioning of such effort. The second meaning problematizes the first, and in so doing provides a corrective to the tendency toward a static, transcendental, and essentialist humanism. Also, fittingly, the word trying is a gerund, suggesting an ongoing process, as is trespassing, the term around which we are honoring Masao Miyoshi in today's conference. Masao would enjoin us to keep on trying and trespassing.